Hi there, everyone. This is Marvell Adams Jr., CEO of Caregiver Action Network, here with another installment of our National Family Caregivers Month webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about intergenerational caregiving, really the balancing act that many caregivers strive to be able to connect with not only serving their parents, but also their kids as well as themselves. Um, you may not know this, but 1 in 4 caregivers across the US are actually caring for both older adults and children, which makes caregiving all the more difficult and challenging to navigate. But not only that, during the epidemic of COVID, we really found out that, you know, that work-life balance was something we talked about, but I think many organizations really didn't quite understand what that meant. And so today we're going to be talking more about what it means to be an intergenerational caregiving family and understanding a bit more about how we can not only support caregivers that are caring for multiple generations, but also ensuring that we have a full understanding of how to best support them and their needs. Joining me today will be two wonderful individuals that I've gotten to know so well. One is Dr. Connie Siskowski, who is the founder and president of American Association of Caregiving Youth, as well as Kristen Kiefer, who is the executive director of Generations United. Connie and Kristen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You know, I have to start off just by asking how are you connected to caregiving? Connie, I'll start with you if that's okay, because, I've gotten to know you over the years, and certainly our audience today would know about your role in the most recent caregiving documentary that debuted on PBS, as well as being your organization being one of CNN's heroes a few years back. But what is your connection to caregiving, and how did you become the founder of the American Association of Caregiving Youth?
So it's kind of a long story, so I'll try and do the short version. But I took care of my grandfather when I was in middle school. And my parents were divorced, so we lived with my grandparents. I had an older brother who still is kind of geeky and really was not person oriented as was not my grandmother. And my mother worked 2 jobs. So my grandfather and I were really close, and he worked until he was 84, and he stopped working because his health was deteriorating. So, being my hero and really just loving him, it was my honor to help in whatever ways I could. However, at that age, I wasn't prepared for some of the things that were required, such as personal care. And he was tall, helping him with mobility. And then I moved my bedroom essentially into our living room so I could be closer in case he needed something during the night. And I was the one at 2 o'clock in the morning when I went to take him his medicine that I can still feel the coolness of his skin and that he
Mhm.
was no longer breathing. So it was at a time, when trauma in children was just not recognized. So, and then, it wasn't only that trauma, but then here I am going to high school and my rock was gone. So, I went on to nursing school and have a broad background in healthcare. Including home care, hospice care. I was a nursing home administrator, opened an extended care facility in Newark, New Jersey, and I moved to Florida in 1990. So, and along the way, I had made some bad choices, particularly regarding men, because I wanted to be loved. Where was my grandfather? So it wasn't until I was in counseling here in Florida that it was pointed out to me that the trauma that I had gone through as a child had impacted my adult life. So around the mid or early 1990s, I met Gail Hunt and Suzanne Mintz. So I was very familiar with her and the beginnings of the National Family Caregivers Association, now CAN. And actually, she and I went to the first international conference on family caregiving in London. And that was in 1998. And it was there that I learned about what the UK has done to support what they call young carers since the early 1990s. So I went on a mission trip with kids from my church, and one of the boys' dad had just died, and another girl's dad had pancreatic cancer.
Mm.
So, and then I remarried for the fourth time, having been in unhealthy relationships prior to then. And my husband, who was in the pharmaceutical industry, was doing a lot of traveling. And so he encouraged me to go back to school to get my PhD, which I was doing to have a bigger voice for all family caregivers, never expecting to uncover the large population for the first time in our country of caregiving youth, and had the opportunity to include a section on a countywide survey that went to public, middle, and high schools here in Palm Beach County, which is the 10th largest school district in our country. And it revealed that of the 12,000 kids, more than 6,700 had someone in their family with a health condition. More than 6,000 of them were providing care, and more than 4,000, or 1 in 3, said they were either missing homework, missing completing homework, missing school, or having trouble focusing or doing some combination of that. So it was still at a time when schools were looking at, what's wrong with the schools, what's wrong with the teachers. They weren't really thinking about what else is going on within the family that is influencing the child and their ability to learn. So I had shared this data, and Carol Levine of United Hospital Fund Foundation in New York had convened a meeting, brought over some people from the UK. I shared my data, and Rick Green, who was then with the Administration on Aging, announced that um, they would fund the first ever uh, caregiving study of kids. And so that was released in 2005, and it showed that there were at least 1.3 million children ages 8 to 18 in that role. And so with that came some media attention. And then soon after, in March of 2006, there was a study called the Silent Epidemic, and it looked at young adults who dropped out of school, and 22% said it was to care for a family member. So with some visuals from the media and those two reports, I was able to get some funding for our organization, which I had started in 1998 to provide volunteers to people who were homebound and caregiving families. So we began what was called the Young Caregiver Project, which was named after young caregivers in the US, that first study. However, as we began, young could be somebody like Kristen or you guys, not like me, or, and so we had to convert to the term youth. And so then youth caregivers is often referred to people who provide like aftercare in school. And caregiver itself is such a nebulous word. It has so many meanings. So that's why we quickly switched for communication purposes to the Caregiving Youth Project, which began in 2006. So here we
Oh,
are.
wow. Connie, I mean, as long as I've known of your organization and your history, I've not known the depth of background and experience that really brought you to where you are. Yet I couldn't help but sit here and think about that. I didn't realize I was a caregiving youth until I came to serve Caregiver Action Network a couple years ago. When my mom had a stroke when I was in middle school in rural South Carolina, my after school and before school changed pretty dramatically. And also noting that, being the only child in the house, my two older brothers had already moved out because they were considerably older than I was. And, my dad, if he didn't work, he didn't get paid. And so, it wasn't as if someone asked. And that's what I also heard, through your story as well. It's just something that you did. And it's this aspect of how we connect across generations in ways that, quite frankly, across the world is almost a given, and sometimes in the US, when we talk about this, I say it's a very US problem that we have here, in the sense of losing our connection to really community and villages, and Kristen, I want to pivot to you because Generations United, of which I'm a new board member of and just really honored to serve, it's that's really what Generations United is all about. If you could just share a little bit about your own connection with caregiving and a little bit about Generations United.
Well, first I have to thank Connie for calling me young. So that was a very nice beginning to our conversation. But
It's
no, but
very
but thank you so much, Marvell. I mean, what you are doing here is so important. I think a lot of us don't identify as caregivers because, as you said, you do what you need to do. My personal journey, I've always been, similar to Connie. My grandparents were my heroes. And so I always realized the power of generational dialogue and connection. So dedicated my career in the aging services network space. Also served on the school board and saw a lot of the issues that Connie has shared a bit in the schools, which I look forward to diving deeper into. But I am a personal caregiver. When my mother-in-law was the age of 61, she suffered a stroke in front of my small children at the time, became completely paralyzed on one side, and life had completely changed. So we have since, for over 15 years, have served as personal aides to my mother-in-law while my father-in-law was in the hospital multiple times for kidney issues, while trying to juggle where our kids would be on each given night, not knowing what the next day was going to produce after her stroke. So it's very personal, and you don't understand it until you're in it. And so whatever I can personally do, Generations United or us as the collective, to ensure that those going through the same thing have those supports, and know where to go so they don't have to go through what we may have gone through in that maze called caregiving navigation.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of my personal journey through this. So I look forward to this conversation.
Well,
Wow,
and if
Kristen.
I just might comment too, that it's not just intergenerational, it's multiple systems. So we have to work between systems of education, healthcare, and the community. And you all do too. And it's not easy to get systems to work together.
That is an excellent point, Connie. When you mentioned about the survey of caregiving youth and finding out just what the percentages were, that was in the 1990s, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, still today we have very little data on the number of caregiving youth, particularly caregiving youth and being recognized within schools. Could you talk a little bit about what that impact means for caregiving overall, and what that impact may be for that caregiving youth?
Yeah, so the absence of recognition by schools is really prevalent. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to change. But, it's interesting as I met with and it's going to take government help, right? And policy changes, because right now you have to be 18 or older in order to access services. So one of the representatives I had met with said, "Well, Connie, children shouldn't be doing this. They should be in foster care." And so, that's pretty illogical, because who's going to take care of the person that they were taking care of, much less who's going to take care of them? So, but we have to approach this from a viewpoint of understanding. And if somebody, you know, lives in kind of a bubble and hasn't experienced caregiving or family health issues or whatever, they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And so the other important thing is making sure that this gets in the curriculum. So how can we expect when a child is late to school that the teacher will ask why instead of just making the assumption that this is a bad kid, who's maybe dallied along the way or overslept or whatever, and then they wind up getting detention. So if they don't know, if it's not in their curriculum of educators, should we expect them to know what they don't know? And the same goes for nurses and pediatricians and counselors and anybody, involved in this whole issue. So
Yeah.
it's complex, and it's
Yeah.
further made complex by the individual situations in each family. Right, so
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
not like, it's not like making a chocolate chip cookie, my favorite thing to do, but where you have a recipe and you have this, and this, and instead, each situation is unique. And today, I think more than ever, our families have fear that if people knew what their children were doing to help support them, that they could be removed, if they would be judged. And now with some of the immigration issues,
Hmm.
there's further fear, and even with grandparents raising grandchildren, that fear exists also. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, Connie, because it does, point out a really tangible and longstanding stigma that comes along with, intergenerational and youth caregiving youth. Kristen, I'd be curious if you could paint, a picture of what are we talking about here when we talk about, intergenerational or across generations, and what that looks like. That it can show up in many different ways, but in order to reduce stigma, it's important for us to really educate folks on what does that look like. So from Generations United standpoint, who are you talking about when you talk about uniting generations and recognizing those types of chosen family?
No, thank you for asking that question. I think Connie's hit upon one of the groups that we're really immersed with through our network and a technical assistance center, actually the only one devoted to grandparents raising grandchildren. We're seeing many of the issues Connie talked about. It's from the grandparents not being able to get access to certain things in the educational system, or the supports and services just by virtue of legality. So we're seeing barriers there for both the children and the grandparents, trying to do what's right, but the system not supporting them appropriately. I think the other thing, with Generations United, it's all about connection. So for us, shared sites where older adults and children are literally in the same location.
Hmm.
You're putting childcare and sort of adult care together so that they're learning from each other and kind of caring in a slightly different way, but introducing each other to different ways of doing things while supporting each other in that role. And lastly, there are also housing sites where they're
Hmm.
intentionally putting generations together as a model of caregiving, in different ways, whether mental, physical, emotional. For some of those, folks that have been, particularly the children,
Hmm.
raised in trauma, having that community in an actual housing location that is very intentional in its programming, very intentional in the interactions and the shared spaces, is something more that we at Generations United would like to see get to scale in the country, because we do think that could be a potential solution to some of the issues we're talking about today.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kristen, because it's interesting to see that you go right to one of the opportunities to create community, and we talk about that a lot at Caregiver Action Network, and I've heard you both, speak about community already in our conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more, Kristen, about some of the barriers you see to really helping that intergenerational connection, either be regained or sustained?
Yeah, I think, some of the barriers for the grandparents raising grandchildren, we talked a little bit about. I think we've also discussed just the general lack of recognition. I think that caregiving is often seen as just sort of my generation, I call ourselves the paninis, you're smushed between your children and your older adult, likely sometimes a parent or someone else. So the lack of recognition, whether it's for youth or for grandparents raising grandchildren, is something that to me is just a barrier in general to the national dialogue. I think the limited access to benefits for caregivers outside of formal systems, for
Mhm.
a variety of reasons, as well as when you look at the workplace. I mean, it's the same. You sort of overlook caregiving beyond children and childcare issues. I was blessed that my organization understood what it was like to care for an older adult, and it became my respite. And I would love for the whole country to have that, whether you're a child in school having the right supports, or in your workplace. So those are a lot of the things that we're seeing as far as the intergenerational housing issues and trying to get folks to understand what that really means. It's not just
Mhm.
about generations, getting together and hanging out for the day. It really is making it an intentional community of connection for lasting relationships, not just one-offs and calling it a generational caregiving. It is intentional and it is mutually beneficial.
So years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the in the Bronx. There's a housing unit for grandparents raising grandchildren of Presbyterian Senior Services. So that was really neat. But then we wanted to go back to look at how many of those grandparents became ill, and then the role was reversed. So we haven't yet had an opportunity to do that, but I think, on a broader scale, that would really be helpful so that these children, can feel supported, not only the grandparents from the educational perspective, but the children from, their caregiving
Mhm.
perspective and having to do things that they never expected to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Connie. I mean, it's astonishing to see not only that we recognize and understand just how much caregiving is happening across generations, but also recognizing that I think the latest statistics show that more than half of the counties across the United States already have a population of older adults, 65 plus, that outnumber, for the first time, those under the age of 18. And I think by the end of this decade, which is not far away, that most of the country will tip into that category. And so it brings up a lot of systemic issues that really have to be handled. I'd be curious to get your insights on, what are some of the solutions you see that really are going to make it possible to bring kind of to scale some of the support that's needed for caregiving youth to be successful, and to really understand that if it's not well integrated, that the issues that we're bound to continue to be plagued with aren't going to just go away.
Well, but it's not only that, it's also workforce development. And if caregiving youth are supported and really get satisfaction and enjoy their role, um, and many want to go into healthcare. And as you mentioned, the lower birth rate and the fewer children, who's going to take care of people as they grow older and need support. So, from a workforce development perspective, it really behooves the government and others to honor, recognize, and support caregiving youth.
Yeah. And it makes me think of my I was one of three kids, but my mom was one of 11. And you see that difference from generation to generation. And I'd be curious to get both your thoughts, and I'll start with you, Connie, around the other piece that isn't talked about as much is sibling caregiving. And so many times you think of caregiving youth and they're supporting their parents, but many times it is not just the parents. Sometimes it's the siblings, sometimes it's the grandparents, sometimes it's the neighbors. But can you talk a little bit about what caregiving youth, just what type of scope are we talking about in their support of others?
So you mentioned sibling care, and we have seen a dramatic increase in that over the past years. Uh, our last study showed that 18% of our kids, and we served about 700 just in Palm Beach County alone last year, were providing care for a sibling. Typically, as we see the level, or at least the diagnosis of autism rising,
Mhm.
that is needed, and as we have more families in which two parents are required to work in order to pay the rent and buy food, that more is pushed down to the sibling. And so within some families, culturally, there's that expectation. But I think also we need to pay attention to the employed family caregiver who um, who may be in intergenerational caregiving positions, but become so overwhelmed perhaps with the care of their own parent that and that they don't realize what their children are going through when they're at work and providing care, and the children want to protect their parent, and so they don't share with the parent what they're going through. And this is to one, we're having a conference next month. And one of the students who is participating always got good grades, except he was a caregiver for his grandmother who had Alzheimer's disease, and her
Mhm.
bedroom was right across the hall from his. So when she would get up during the night and everything, he would get up, his grades dropped. Now his family is very success focused, and he always got A's. And so his mother was on a call with us the other day, and he talked about how at the end of the year he was getting D's on his report card. And when he shared it with his parent, she fainted. And she told us she fainted because she was so shocked that caregiving had impacted her son as much.
Wow. That's an astonishing thing to hear, and it really underscores just how we talk about caregivers being invisible, and caregiving youth perhaps even more so because of the types of things that they are traversing, and as you said, it's the lack of recognition within the school system and with the overall system of caregiving, and going back to you, Kristen, in thinking about that chosen family and thinking about generations coming together to for the betterment of all. Can you talk to us a little bit about how um intergenerational caregiving shows up in kind of everyday life that you see within Generations United, and kind of what do you find your organization's goal is around trying to support that intergenerational connection?
Yeah, I'll kind of start with the second part. I think there is policy. If we're talking about solutions, there's some policy solutions. But there's also the need for perspective. So what I mean by that is we have to start seeing caregiving, whatever that looks like to anybody, as a shared societal responsibility from older adult down to the child who's impacted, or as Connie's speaking about, actual caregivers themselves. It's a shared responsibility. It's not a private struggle. And so at Generations United, our whole mantra is, it's about connection, caregiving as connection. And what that connection looks like can be very different. I'll talk a little bit about my school board experience and what I saw. Our population was very much, first generation here in this country. And so the cultural differences were so different that as a person on the school board, if you didn't really immerse yourself in those communities to understand all the variables that are going on in their lives, the parents have to work two jobs, sometimes at night. These children would have to leave high school to go get their siblings at elementary school, take care of them, make sure they're fed until their parents got home from work, get them to school. And Connie alluded to, there's tardiness, there's absenteeism, and then there's the effect on their grades. So when we think about it at Generations United, it's how do you break down the barriers, both for the children that are impacted and are already going through trauma themselves because their parent may be missing in their household, and they're being put into the care of their grandparents or in foster care. And then you have grandparents who think that their caregiving responsibilities are over. All of a sudden, in the age of 60 or
Bingo.
70, are going back to the basics of raising a child, but cannot get access to their health care. And in turn, as we're seeing, mental health, first of all, their health is going to decline even more quickly. Then they're going to need caregiving. So it's this domino effect of if we don't have the systems in place and the right access, then it's just going to keep going across all generations. And so our goal here at Generations Unite is to make sure we're raising that awareness, that it is a lifespan issue. It's not just a one point in time issue. And also that health and mental health in this country needs to be taken seriously, because you have so many layers of it in the caregiving space, that I don't know that we're acknowledging yet as a country. And
Yeah.
so that's really kind of our megaphone, I would say.
Yeah. No, no, beautifully said. Because it really, and I appreciate you underscoring the mental health aspect of it. Because, and as Connie, as you mentioned earlier, the trauma that can come along with that. Because, I say sometimes when talking about just adult caregivers, of saying, caregiving, is a responsibility that you didn't decide one day. Oh, I'm going to take a course over the next 6 months, and then I'll be certified, and I'll be a caregiver on January 1st. It one day you're not a caregiver, and the next day you are, as many times it happens to individuals. And when we're talking about caregiving youth and caring across generations, it is so unexpected, because it really is not a role that we systemically talk about and prepare individuals for, but more and more because of the growing need, for family caregivers and the support that they bring to loved ones. This is a part of the conversation we really have to hold up more. I would be curious to hear from both of you as we start to close. Is Connie, what's one thing you can really encourage folks to do when it comes to holding up and supporting caregiving youth, and how we can really better support them systemically?
Well, I just like to raise one more point, and that there's such a difference if you're helping somebody who's chronically ill and you know that that's going to take time. If you're supporting somebody who's maybe terminally ill, or if your mom and gets hit by a drunk driver and now becomes disabled and your whole life changes. So I think we have to be very responsive to those different scenarios in terms of how do you help. I had one of the kids say to me, why doesn't somebody just say thank you?
Mm,
So,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and I tell people, so you can see a kid pushing, an adult or someone in a wheelchair, and you think, oh, this is really nice that they're doing that. But who thinks about what happens when they get home? And that's when their work first begins. So I think this whole subject has to go from out of sight, out of mind to out of sight, in mind, and that working together to bring that about and getting the support of the government and private community can really make a difference. It's gone on too long, and it's time to change that.
Yeah. Oh wow. Really, really well put, Connie. I mean, it's astonishing just to see, um, you know, when you think through, okay, what are they asking for? And sometimes it is just that simple recognition of what they, because as we say about caregivers all the time, is that caregivers aren't looking for someone to just take, away from them what they are doing. They as anyone would want to be for their parents or for their siblings or for their kids, they want to be there for them. But there are so many barriers, there's so many difficulties that can go around that. And particularly when you are, again, made invisible by someone just thinking, oh, aren't you doing a nice thing, but not really understanding what's behind all of that work. Um, Kristen, if you had some advice or at least insights you could share with our audience today, what's one thing you would encourage them to do in order to support intergenerational connection and caregiving?
I would say to the caregivers who, are close to all of our hearts on here, just to reach out, reconnect. Care is stronger when it's shared, and it may be just that simple thank you that you give to a colleague or to somebody that you see on the street. I think for us here at Generations United, we see the act of caregiving as a bridge between generations. So, one thing that caregivers can take, a step today is reach out, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's a peer group, or a local kinship or grand family network. Because connection is care, but you have to do it together. And so that's sort of for the caregivers. Don't isolate. We need to make sure your stress is reduced, which is easier said than done. But also just simply remind them and make sure we're raising that flag to say you are not alone in this. And, for those of us on this call who've been, caregivers, it can be a lonely place. It can be stressful. You don't know where to turn, but you also can't be afraid to say, hey, I'm at my wit's end and I need you. I need your help. I need 10 minutes of time. So ask for help. Connection can restore your balance, it can restore your hope. And, I'll just kind of end here with, what we say at Generations United is that, we care across generations and we create communities where everyone belongs and everyone thrives. And I think that has to be true in the caregiving space. So I really do appreciate the awareness that you're building around with this series, Marvell and your team. It's amazing. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. And we're just glad to be here to talk about it with both of you.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, Kristen. And as you put it, there are resources available through all three of our organizations, and so we encourage anyone today, whether reaching out through Generations United's website and resources and the technical center there for grand families, through the American Association of Caregiving Youth that Connie is the founder of, as well as caregiveraction.org to find more information now. And well beyond National Family Caregivers Month, because the aspect of this that really becomes so apparent after our conversation today is that using our voices and making sure people understand what the issues are, understanding that caregiving youth are more and more being put into situations where they are stepping up, and that doesn't mean that the school day is gonna just delay for them. It doesn't mean that the homework is just going to be put on hold, but it does mean that we really do have more and more responsibility to speak up and speak to our school systems, our school boards, our neighbors, our friends, and really make sure people understand that caregiving youth and intergenerational caregiving is another part of the backbone of our health system that cannot falter, can't be allowed to falter, because without that connection, as you said, several times, Kristen, that intentional connection and community, it's really, if we want to call it the secret sauce, whatever that may be, but it is undeniable that it's a part of our ability to really continue to thrive and support individuals that need it. So for everyone that's tuning in today, I encourage you to reach out to Caregiver Action's National Caregiver Help Desk that you can reach through our website, as well as join some of our groups through Facebook, as well as on social media. But really, at the end of the day, please, take the time that you can to take a breath for yourself, as well as understanding that those around you not only are there to help, but recognize that you are carrying something that is unique, and it's something that really we cannot do without. So, I'll just lastly say, for everyone joining us today, that it really is an honor to bring together these two great individuals, Connie and Kristen. You guys do such amazing work, and I've just, become even more of a fan talking to you today, and just understanding not only the strength and the compassion that you show yourselves through today and through your teams, but also just recognizing across generations that, it reminds us that in order for us to really support caregivers in the way that they deserve, we have to recognize that it is not a solitary thing. It cannot be a solitary thing. And so each and every one of us is a partner in providing that guidance and providing that connection. And at the end of the day, providing hope that this really can be better and do better for all of us. And so thank you so much for your expertise and guidance. And we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I just want to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors that have really made this webinar series possible and our entire Plug Into Care campaign. As you can see here, it represents organizations across the country and across the globe that center caregiving in everything they do and making it possible for family caregivers across the country to really be there for their loved ones, feel supported, and ensure that really they can do their best by ensuring that their loved ones can thrive. So thanks so much to our sponsors. And in addition to that, I want to make sure everyone has the information they need. So reach out to us in any way that is most comfortable for you. Do it often. And you can reach out to us on the web at caregiveraction.org. But also know that we're just a phone call away at our Caregiver Help Desk, our National Caregiver Help Desk, which also now has a downloadable app that you can find. And so feel free to check that out. As always, our resources are of no cost to caregivers. And so whether you engage with us through our website, through our social media, welcome you to join our Facebook group as well. But no matter what, just know you are not alone, and Caregiver Action is here to stay connected with you.